If you could move the slide, Deb, thank you. My name is Terry Nash Giovannucci. I'm introducing the 2022 and 2023 QAP that applies to all tax credits, but particularly applications you may be thinking about putting in for the 2023 9% tax credit round. My
Terry,
role.
I'm sorry, excuse me, but can you let Derek Bryan in, our financial director for Greenwich Communities?
Yeah, I clicked the Outlook to go in.
Yeah, I don't see anybody in the lobby.
Maybe you have to do it again.
I'll try it again.
Okay, he's going to try again. Thank you.
Okay, sure. I am keeping an eye on it. So as people come in, I'm admitting. So hopefully as soon as I see him, in he comes. My role pertains to community outreach, policy, and planning. So I'll be giving you a broad overview of the QAP. And I'm joined by my colleagues and subject matter experts from CHFA, from DOH, the Department of Developmental Services, and other agencies who will bring their expertise and some guidance to help with your application process. There's many attending today with varying levels of experience with the tax credit program. So this presentation is intended to speak to everyone. Okay. Okay, thanks, Deb. CHFA takes a multifaceted approach in developing the Qualified Allocation Plan. The Board of Directors and its task force periodically convene meetings to consider the tax credit allocations and the QAP's role in supporting the state's affordable housing policy. The QAP is reviewed and revisions take into consideration policy shifts and data analysis of past production, along with comments from the public. When we developed the 2022 and 2023 QAP, multiple opportunities were provided for input. Comments were solicited in working groups, roundtables, and listening sessions, as well as more formal public input and public comment periods. All of this collective information and data gathering informed the QAP that you will see covers 2 years. So this is the second year of the 2-year QAP, intended to provide greater predictability to the development community. For 2023, the QAP remains unchanged and governs the credits available this year in the same way it did last year. There's 2 classifications, and this is a very significant difference. The 2 classifications do not compete against each other. We have preservation, which is the substantial rehabilitation of existing occupied multifamily rental housing, and new construction, which is everything else. It's anticipated that 25% of the reservations from each annual credit ceiling will be made under the preservation classification, and 75% of the reservations will be made under the new construction classification. The amount of annual awards or reservations made in each classification, however, can change based on relevant considerations and limitations necessary to achieve the objectives of the plan. So now with the preservation classification, again, those applications are not scored in the same way as new construction. They're instead evaluated based on specific priorities. There's no points awards. Applicants applying under the preservation classification compete against each other, only within that classification. The preservation classification evaluation criteria includes greatest need, connection to community revitalization, expiring use, preservation in areas of opportunity, energy efficiency and sustainability, and the experience of the developer. All factors are considered when evaluating an application. It's not like in that order. If you had the greatest need, that doesn't ensure success. Continued broad policy goals include rental affordability and supportive housing, a family focus on non-age restricted housing, sustainable and energy efficient design, and deconcentrating poverty. There remains a great need for apartments affordable to extremely low and very low income households. Deep income targeting and mixed income housing inclusive of supportive housing for special needs populations remains a key policy goal, and we support the works of the state to end homelessness. You'll learn more about sustainable design measures and efforts to deconcentrate poverty through opportunity mapping later on in this presentation. But next up, you'll hear from Debbie Alter. She will share important dates on information specific to 9% low-income housing tax credits, along with a lot of helpful tips on the process to assist you.
Because there's another thing where you can go into another
Debbie.
area where you can turn the volume up and down.
Thanks, Terry. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us this morning. It's that time of year again. We're gearing up for another 9% tax credit round. So these are the important dates that you need to know. The preliminary application submission period will begin on September 19th. I'll be talking a little bit about this in a minute. This is going to be concurrent with the DOH DEP process this year. Once we receive the preliminary applications, we will contact you for a pre-application conference. I expect those to take place between September 28th and November 23rd. As a reminder, Shippo and Cipa pre-application notifications are due 90 days before an application due date, so that's about October 14th. So make sure you get those in. As I said, the preliminary application submission period will end on November 4th. Applications for taxable bond financing from CHFA will be due on December 6th. And soft letters for that financing will be issued by the end of the year. The last date to request a Sharepoint site for your 9% submission will be January 4th, 2023. And then the applications will be due by 4 p.m. on January 11th, 2023. It's very important to note that it is by 4 p.m. Okay, as per the QAP, all tax credit applicants are required to submit a preliminary application to CHFA and attend a pre-application conference. This year, the 2023 9% round preliminary application period will run concurrently with the DOH development engagement process that was recently announced. 9% applicants will complete the same online preliminary application, and those applications will begin to be accepted on September 19th and must be submitted by November 4th. There was an e-blast that went out recently. If you need more information on that, please reach out to me. Once a preliminary application is received, CHFA staff will be in touch to schedule a virtual pre-application conference within about 10 days of receipt of that application. Participants will include staff from CHFA Underwriting and Technical Services, DOH Project Management and ATS staff, and applicants are encouraged to include any members of your development team that may have questions, would be helpful in the discussion, or may benefit from some of the information. This is expected to be a high-level discussion of your proposal, and staff is available to answer questions, but please note that we cannot give you a definite determination on whether something will receive points or not at this conference. That can only be determined once a full application is received and reviewed. Pre-application conferences, again, are expected to begin late September and continue to around Thanksgiving. It bears repeating more than once that applications are due no later than 4 p.m. on January 11th, 2023. Kurt, you have your hand up. Do you have a question?
Yeah, Debbie, sorry, there was just a question in the chat. So basically they're just, the question is about hybrid projects, 4% and a 9%, if they would need to have two separate pre-applications.
Oh,
I
no.
just typed in a response and suggested it might be helpful, but not necessary.
Oh, you mean the application itself? I thought you meant the conference. There will be one conference, but yes,
right.
two application
Yes.
would be helpful. Okay. The only thing that has to be mailed into CHFA's offices these days is the application fees. We take all the submissions online through Sharepoint, but the checks do need to be mailed into the office, and the fees are for a for-profit applicant, $1,000. For a nonprofit applicant applying for less than 20 units, it's $500. or I mean, sorry, for a for-profit applicant with less than 20 units, it's $500, and a not-for-profit applicant, it's $250. If you are considering taxable bond financing, there is also an application fee required for that. Okay, all threshold items must be met for applications to be considered. This includes information that will show that you're in compliance with the basic threshold items outlined in the QAP, as well as all the items on the exhibit checklist in the consolidated application that are marked with a T. Those are threshold. Applications that fail to meet threshold requirements may be eliminated from consideration. As in the past, there will not be a deficiency period or an opportunity to provide missing information. CHFA does reserve the right to seek clarification on underwriting items that were included in the submission, but new information is not accepted. If necessary, CHFA will schedule a conference call to discuss items requiring clarification, and applicants will have 5 business days to respond. Clarification calls are expected to take place in late February or early March. Once the points review is complete, CHFA will be offering applicants a courtesy points review call to go over the scoring as determined by CHFA. There is an opportunity at that point for applicants to point out items that may have been missed, uploaded in the wrong place, or to verbally clarify items that were misunderstood. But again, no new information is accepted after the application due date. So please be sure to make sure that all your points exhibits are uploaded and clearly marked in SharePoint so it's easy for us to identify them. We expect that award recommendations will be presented to the CHFA board at its meeting. That will be April 27th, 2023. That is what we are targeting at this time. This could possibly change. Okay, the basic threshold requirements as outlined in the QAP, there are 22 of them, so please take a look at those. One very important one is that all applications must demonstrate a credible financing plan. The applications must adhere to the caps on the number of 9% credits allowed by the QAP. This has not changed. It is still 30,000 per qualified unit and 20% of the population component of the 2023 credit ceiling. So that number is not out yet. The IRS has not yet issued the multiplier for the population component, nor have they issued the 2023 population number. So a good benchmark to use would be the 2022 number, which was 1,874,910. Hopefully that will be a little higher this year, but for purposes of working on your application now, I would use that as a benchmark. As soon as we have the exact number, we will publish that via eBlast. Firm commitments for funding are required for all sources except for DOH funding. That does include a requirement for a commitment from CHFA. So again, if you are interested in pursuing CHFA taxable bond financing, you will need to submit that preliminary application ahead of time, and a soft letter will be issued to you prior to the application due date. DOH funding is, again, the only exception to the requirement for a written commitment. DOH funds are applied for concurrently and reviewed along with the 9% submission. Please make sure that all the information that you've listed on your Exhibit 6.5 of the CONAP is the sources and uses of funds. Make sure everything matches and agrees with the commitment letters or letters of interest that you have provided. Other basic threshold requirements include site control and zoning approval. Please make sure that 20% of the total units are targeted to households above 30% AMI and at or below 50% of AMI. This is a QAP requirement. Also, the QAP requires a minimum 40-year affordability commitment. This is a little bit more than the tax credit code. This is something the QAP does require. And again, plans and specs must be at a minimum 40% completion level to meet threshold. A qualified development team is required. all applicants must comply with CHFA's program eligibility requirements. That means you cannot be out of compliance with any CHFA program. That's HTCC, LIHTC, any asset management AFSs that are overdue, things like that. Make sure everything is in line. Architects and general contractors must be licensed in Connecticut, and management companies must be approved by CHFA. Again, there are 22 of these basic threshold criteria, and you should check out the QAP to see the rest of them. Okay, CHFA does evaluate development teams on capacity and past performance. We're looking at the ability to meet established timelines, any deviation from proposed costs, the ability to execute proposals as originally submitted, compliance with tax credit and other funding programs, as well as the successful operation of developments. And applicants are also encouraged to review the capacity of any development team members that you've selected. As a reminder, the QAP does state that if the applicant has direct or indirect ownership interest in a 9% LIHTC program application or development that received an award in both of the preceding 2 calendar years, those previously awarded reservations must be on track to meet program benchmarks as determined by CHFA. CHFA's underwriting standards do apply to the 9% application. Debt service coverage should be a minimum of 1.15 in year 1 of operations. For any 9% developments proposing to carry amortizing debt, a 1.0 debt service coverage must be maintained without the use of pre-funded reserves for the first 15 years. Developer fees must be calculated in accordance with CHFA's sliding scale, and that can be found in the CHFA procedures, which can be found on our website. Trending assumptions are 2% for income and 3% for expenses. Operating expenses are reviewed against CHFA's per unit operating expense ranges. Please keep in mind that the published range is for the current year and should be trended forward to the stabilized year that is proposed in your application. Again, these are found in the underwriting guidelines, which are found on the website. Applications may propose the use of the income averaging minimum set aside. We do have some requirements for the use of this set aside outlined in the LIHTC guidelines found on the website. Please keep in mind that these requirements may be superseded at any time by IRS guidance, and we do expect IRS guidance to come out this fall. So please keep an eye out for that. We will share it via eBlast if any changes are made to our current policy. And if you choose to use this set aside, please make sure that you and your managing agents understand the potential challenges with the compliance under this set aside. There is a published guideline for 4%, 9% hybrid financing structures that is also available on the website. Proposals must be of a scale to produce demonstrable savings of scarce resources and an increased production of affordable housing units. Applicants must discuss their intention to submit a hybrid proposal at the pre-application conference, and it must meet the criteria that is outlined in both the QAP and the hybrid financing structure guideline. The QAP does have some information on credit caps. The cap on 9% credits is still calculated solely on the 9% side. So it's $30,000 per qualified unit only in the 9% side. As Terry mentioned, we have 2 classifications of applications. The first is the preservation classification. This is the substantial rehabilitation of existing and occupied multifamily rental housing. If the property is being demolished and the proposal includes a 1-for-1 replacement of the same number of units, then it could be considered under the preservation classification. But if any change to the number of units is being made, then it would fall under the new construction class. This classification is not subject to the same scoring as the new construction class, but these applications are evaluated based on a list of priorities that Terry outlined earlier. The new construction classification includes anything that is not eligible in the preservation classification and is scored in accordance with the scoring criteria outlined in the QAP. And as Terry mentioned, we do intend to award 25% of the 9% credits to the preservation class and 75% to the new construction class. So this graphic shows the breakdown and the weighting of the points priorities. The largest emphasis is on rental affordability, followed by financial efficiency and sustainability, then local commitment and impact, opportunity characteristics, and qualifications and experience. There is a total of 100 possible points in the QAP for the new construction class. So some helpful hints on points, things that I've seen over the years that I want to remind people of. To obtain points for supportive housing units, you need to provide a supportive service plan that has been prepared by a qualified service provider. There is a list of those acceptable providers in the supportive housing guideline that is also found on CHFA's website. You must include a budget for the supportive services and must evidence a plan of how you're going to fund those services, and that plan must be sustainable for at least 15 years. If you do plan to include a pre-funded service reserve, make sure that is included in the development budget. If the expenses are expected to be carried in the operating budget, make sure that is included. If the supportive housing units are not covered by rent subsidies, do not assume that the tenants will have sufficient income to pay the minimum tax credit rents. What we do like to see you assume is that when connected to services, a supportive housing tenant will receive at least SSI income. That amount of income was $794 per month in 2022. It is expected to increase in 2023, but I don't think it's been released yet. So please base your rental assumptions for supportive housing units on no more than 30% of the SSI income amount. For the on-site resident services coordinator, there is a form called the Acknowledgment of Guidelines for Resident Service Coordinators that needs to be completed and signed in order to receive points. And it is helpful if you indicate whether a full-time or part-time resident service coordinator is included. There are different points levels for either full-time or part-time, and sometimes it's hard for us to tell. And if we just look at the amount that is budgeted, it looks like they're not even making minimum wage if they're going to be full-time. So it's helpful if you help us understand that. I see a question about Section 811 that will be coming up later in the presentation. Another points category is for other permanent funding sources. These are non-debt sources. They do not include state administered funds or developer funds. So state administered funds would be something like the LIHTC programs, state historic tax credits, and this does not include any funds from the developer. There is a separate points category for developer funds. Again, these are non-debt commitments that should be firm and quantifiable for at least 20 years. If you're using a land contribution, this must be evidenced by an appraisal that is no older than 12 months from the application due date. And CHFA reserves the right to adjust the value for any negative conditions, such as environmental work, that may be required to get the property in shape for building. If you have a tax agreement, it must be approved by the application submission due date, and the applicant must provide a calculation of the value of that tax agreement. Funds from a housing authority or municipality may be counted in this area as long as the housing authority is not a co-sponsor or does not have an ownership interest in the development and the award is documented by formal action. Please note that rental subsidies do not count for points as other permanent funding sources. Cost effectiveness intermediary costs. These costs are third-party services that are related to project development. CHFA will determine which costs must be included in the calculation. There is a calculation in the CONAP, but please note that if you put anything on a line item that's called other, then that is not included in that calculation, even though maybe it should be. The CONAP cannot identify whether it belongs in that calculation or not. So the calculation in the CONAP is just a guideline. It's not what may be the final calculation. For priority locations, the map can be found on OPM's website. We also have a link in the CONAP. Make sure you're using the most updated map, which is the 2018 to 2023 map. A local bus stop does not count as a mass transit station. A mass transit station is only a train station or a station along the CT fast track. Local bus is one that we see that this map often gets wrong. So if you do believe that you deserve the point for a local bus stop, please provide maps and schedules to evidence that the bus stop is within a half a mile of the property and that the bus does run 7 days a week. This is an example of what it looks like. You put the address in, and when you click on it, you should get this pop-up that will tell you which points the property is eligible for. There's a separate category called transit-oriented development. And again, local bus stops are not acceptable for proximity to transit points here. The only things that are eligible for these points are train stations or stations along the CT fast track. Those are the dedicated busway stations, not any local station that may connect to the fast track or a bus that may connect to a train station. It has to actually be within the proper distance from the station itself. The Concerted Community Revitalization Plan and/or Affordable Housing Plan. This was something that was new in this current QAP. So as a reminder, the plan must have been adopted as of the preliminary application deadline, which this year will be November 4th, 2022. The proposed property site must be within the geographic area defined by the plan. A standard land use or comprehensive plan is not eligible for these points unless it contains a specific revitalization component. And this is very important. The organization or group that adopted the plan must provide a certification that no principal of the developer initiated the plan. Points cannot be awarded without this certification, so please make sure you include that in your submission. Completion of the proposed development must contribute to one or more of the plan's stated goals, and there must be evidence that the organization or group has made or will be making specific investments in non-housing infrastructure, amenities, or services beyond just the proposed development.
Hey, Debbie, real quick before we move on.
Sure.
There was one question about the TOD points. Jessica in the chat asked if planned train station or fast track station, does it have to be constructed or operational or just planned?
I believe for the proximity to transit, it does state that it has to be in existence, but I'll have to double check in the QAP. I'm not sure if the potential plans come up on the priority locations map or the potential stations, but I'm pretty sure in the proximity to transit, it does say that they have to be existing stations. Okay, last year, the new Connecticut Opportunity Map was rolled out. This was commissioned by DOH in 2021 and developed with support from the Connecticut Fair Housing Center and the Open Community Alliance. The map indicates towns or sections of towns actually by very high through very low opportunity. These are the criteria that went into that. A third of it is school rating and median income. Another third is employment access, retail job access, job growth, and unemployment percentages. And the third of it is the crime rate, home ownership percentage, and the poverty rate. And this is what it looks like. You need to put the exact address in because, as you can see, some towns have different opportunity indexes in within their borders. Okay, the last of the helpful hints for experience of the sponsor, applicant, or GP. Points can be awarded based on the experience of a principal within the organization or the entity itself. If the applicant is established as a joint venture, which includes a participant with LIHTC experience, it may qualify for points as long as CHFA has determined that the applicant has partnered with a property management company with appropriate LIHTC experience. And should there be a co-sponsor proposed or a joint venture, we will need to see evidence that that co-sponsor is going to materially participate in the transaction and the ongoing operation of the property. Okay, developer sponsor resources. These are an investment in the permanent sources of funds. This is not inclusive of a deferred developer fee or any tax credit equity or any other sort of funding that the developer may have secured. These are actual funds coming from the developer. We need to see evidence that these funds are available and allocated to this development. This can be done by a bank statement along with a certification that these funds are allocated to the development, or a letter from a CPA stating that those funds are available and allocated for the development. If there is a land contribution, if the developer already owns the land, we will need to see an as-is appraisal that is no older than 12 months from the application due date. And as with the other permanent funding sources, if there is any negative condition found on that appraisal, CHFA may adjust the value. A developer sponsor resource point, if that is earned, it is expected that the developer is committing to keep those funds in the deal. So any future obtained sources, such as competitive grants or other loans obtained, or any project cost savings, cannot be used to offset that commitment. If the expectation is that you expect to seek funding, other funding sources that are not available at the time of application, please note that so that we don't offer, or we do not score the points, because once the points are awarded, then, as I said, that is a commitment to keep that money in the deal. All right, that's it for me. I will take a look through the chat unless there's any questions for me right now.
Yeah, hi, Deb. Just the chance. I have a quick question on that last section.
Sure.
The community revitalization plan requirements seem to be more broadly expanded than they were last year.
No, this is right out of the QAP.
That was in the last year's QAP that it has to be certified by a group?
Yes.
Okay, I'll check last year's. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, if there's nothing else, I will turn it over to Jennifer.
Great, thanks, Debbie. Well, good morning, everyone. So I'll be reviewing the technical services guidance for this round. Next slide. Since Terry and Debbie have kind of already gone over this, I won't spend too much time here. Just new construction and preservation, those are the two different classes. Please be aware that if you are proposing a mill conversion or an adaptive reuse that does not currently house multifamily, that would be considered new construction. Anything minor, moderate, or substantial, that would be considered under the preservation class. Under the QAP points, we'll go through this in more detail in the coming slides, but this again just shows the totality of the tech points for new construction. Since new construction would be scored and rated and ranked, these are the points that would be available, with a total of 19 possible points for technical services. We did make one small change. All of these points tallies are the same since the QAP is the same. We did make one small change under cost effectiveness hard costs, which I'll get to in an oncoming slide. 90% plans and specs are required. Just keep that in mind, and 40% is threshold. Next slide. So again, this is looking at the new construction points in more detail under energy conservation. We do have the 3 tiers ranging from 2, 3, or 4 points, depending on that HERS rating or whether you're going for passive house. And again, this is all the same since last year. Nothing really has changed significantly at all on that. Next slide, under green building. Again, we have the 2 tiers, tier 1 for 2 points, tier 2 for 3 points. Again, depending on the level that you're seeking under those initiatives. Under sustainability for renewables, electrification, and resiliency, we have the tier 1 and 2, but we also have the additional additive point for that category. Under the next slide, operations and resiliency. Again, we have the 2 tiers for 1 or 2 points. The difference with tier 2 is just that you're also including that backup power to resiliency for critical systems, emergency lighting, and potable water. And as we saw last year, a lot of applications did seek that digital literacy and connectivity point for the high-speed broadband. That would be for 1 point. Under the preservation class, again, as we've discussed, this is evaluated and not rated and ranked. So these are some of the areas we'll be looking at. But again, we understand that all preservation deals are different. So the proposed scope of work will be different, but we are asking for the highest level of energy efficiency and sustainability that is appropriate for your specific project. Again, given the constraints of your project, given the budget, but this does list some of the things that we would be looking for to have included if at all possible. Under extraordinary cost, if your application will be seeking hard cost effectiveness points, this is the one change we're making. We are asking you to provide some detailed calculations in terms of how you calculated your hard cost that would fall for and be awarded these additional points. So if you can provide that additional backup as part of an exhibit to the CONAP, that would be helpful for us. And this is required and the one new element for this round. Under extraordinary cost, again, if you are seeking extraordinary cost, please provide a breakdown in terms of those costs which you do feel are extraordinary. Just keep in mind that they really truly need to be extraordinary. In past years, we've had applicants claim that permitting costs or other such fees are extraordinary, but those types of costs are seen with virtually every single deal. So we're really looking at truly extraordinary costs for this exhibit. And just some helpful hints, always referred back to the consolidated application for issues, especially when you were talking about time-sensitive documents, especially the phase 1 environmental site assessment. That needs to have an authored date of within 1 year of the application due date, so keep that in mind. The scope of work in your narrative should also match your plans and specs and your construction costs. You need to provide complete data for your project. Your gross square footage that's listed in the CONAP should match back to the source document of the plans that your architect is developing. So please make sure that that information has been coordinated and is accurate. And for the exploded trade payment breakdown and project cost summary, those documents should include detailed cost information on a per unit basis. And by unit, we don't mean the number of residential units, but the type of unit for the material whether it's linear foot, square foot, et cetera. So that is something that should be included. Just a reminder that per CHFA procedures, general requirements is a 6% max, overhead is 2%, and profit is also 6%. Construction contingency, for new constructions, we'd prefer to see a range between 5 and 8%. If it's a rehab or an adaptive reuse, 10% or more would be acceptable. And please remember to include any environmental or abatement costs that are found in your reports in the project cost summary and exploded trade payment breakdown. If you have an existing building or a site that has some contamination, we will be referring back to those reports to ensure that your budgets do include that remediation cost. So just be aware. If your project is subject to prevailing wage or federal Davis-Bacon, we would look to get that rationale. If you believe that your project is not subject to state prevailing wages, we would want to see a letter from the Department of Labor stating that, and also a letter from the Department of Labor just confirming that it would be subject to prevailing wages. And also keep in mind that all sustainable design measures need to be appropriately documented in the plans and specs, with all of those costs noted in the exploded trade payment breakdown and project cost summary. Always refer back to the environmental guideline for any help or assistance. And as I mentioned, costs for remediation need to be included. Please be aware of the date of your phase 1 because that is threshold, that 1 year date. Radon testing is required for existing buildings. And even if you're doing new construction, we would look to see that a radon mitigation system has been included in not only the plans and specs, but also in your costs. Next slide. For sustainability points, just some reminders to remember to reference back to our energy conservation and sustainability guideline for all of those pre and post construction requirements. Soft costs for construction phase inspections, testing, verification. Those soft costs all need to be included in your development budget. So any fees that you have for your engineering consultants, your energy consultants, your HERS rater, that all needs to be included in your budget as a reminder. Again, applicants seeking points for energy conservation and green building. You must have this exhibit and reports from your professional engineer and your rater energy consultant that verify the compliance with the green building, as well as including all modeling reports, checklists, and all supplemental documents. An application seeking renewables, electrification, and resiliency for your solar systems, you need to provide that letter from the engineer just confirming that annual energy demand for the site and common area lighting. So if you're seeking the 75% or the 90%, we need to see that written in that letter from your engineer to receive those specific tiered points. And again, if there are units that may not be included, we do have this calculation for qualifying units. If it's no less than 50% of the units would qualify, then you'd receive 1 point. If no less than 100%, 2 points. So we've kind of done this pro rata calculation in those cases where there might be a combination of new construction or rehab in your project specifically. But if you do have any questions, certainly feel free to reach out and ask. Next slide. And again, post-application. So if you have been awarded a 9% award, keep in mind that you do still require to send us additional information and proof of project registration, payment of the fees. That's all required for the initial close and the issuance of the 42M letter. And also, once the project is completely built, we also do still require that HERS certificates and the proof of relevant certifications at cost certification. So even if you're awarded, you do have these requirements through construction and occupancy. So keep that in mind. And
Thanks,
if
Jen.
anyone does, oh, go ahead.
I was just thanking you.
Yeah, if anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I know, there's a lot of specific, project questions with this information, so feel free to email me. We can always, set up a follow-up call. We can always discuss during the pre-app meeting. So feel free to reach out with any specific questions, since that might be easier, but I can turn it over to Joe. Thank you.
Lou, your hand was up, then it was down, now it's up again.
It's up. Hey, sorry about that, Deb. I apologize. I want to go back to something you had said, Deb, just to make sure I have this correct.
Sure.
I think you had said that any change in the number of units in a rehab would put that application in the new construction category. Is that correct?
Yes. If it's
So even
being
if the
demolished and only partially rebuilt, it would not qualify for the preservation class.
So if a project is a phased application, the last phase of a multi-phase project, and reduces the number of units in the existing buildings by combining smaller units to create larger units. So that would still,
Yes.
Why would that not be considered?
Because we're not preserving all the units. You have less units.
But as part of the overall multi-phase project, you're actually creating more units.
Well, each phase is looked at on its own. So
Okay.
it would be whatever the application is for, those units would be evaluated.
So it's regardless of whether it's fewer units or more units that are being created as part of a rehab. If you're adding units as well as reducing the number of units, it still puts you into new construction.
We can talk about your specific situation.
Yeah.
But
Sure.
I think as a rule of thumb, I mean, preservation is expected to preserve what's there.
Sure. Yeah, no, we can talk offline. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. All right, Joe. You're up.
Good morning, everyone. It continues to be an exciting time for CHFA, but the current interest rate environment represents a challenge to all of us, as we're trying to finance a lot of the items in our pipeline. So with that in mind, we just wanted to continue to provide financing opportunities to applicants in the 9% round. And generally, we are offering that in a few different ways. We can provide construction-only financing to a development, construction to permanent financing, and then, as we have in the past couple of years, provided a permanent-only financing feature. And this is a relatively new product, but it has allowed investor lenders or Federal Home Loan Bank sponsors to participate in the financing on the construction side, and then utilize the CHFA permanent only financing, utilizing CHFA's competitive advantages of long-term fixed rate financing. So some developments have availed themselves of that. I expect that more will as we move forward, but if there's anything that we can do to further explain the products, we'll be happy to have conversations with applicants and proposed applicants. Next slide. So for all of our developments and applicants, we're encouraging folks to explore all financing options, whether you intend to finance with CHFA or not. Those multiple letters of financing interest are of particular importance in the application review. And of course, the use of CHFA financing will not affect a review or score in the 9% round. So don't feel as though there's an obligation to finance with CHFA, but at the same time, if we could help provide some added strength to your transaction, we're happy to consider that. As in the past years, the applications, as Debbie said, are due in advance of the application deadline. This year, it'll be December 6th. And by the end of December, we will have provided soft financing letters for each application to the amount that is supportable by the proposal. So we're happy to entertain that. The construction only product, again, it will be outlined on our website, and the summary will be issued by eBlast. Given the current interest rate environment, unfortunately, we will not be able to offer the 3% fixed financing amount for this upcoming round. We will be migrating to a more index pricing model given the volatility of the interest rate market. However, we can commit to providing fixed rate financing for construction. Typically, the term is not to exceed 24 months. These interest-only payments would continue until maturity. They are prepayable, and as usual, all CHFA underwriting standards apply. I will say that just to give you a preview on the index, we have typically used 10-year Treasury plus 250 basis points for some of our perm products. We're looking at a SOFR model, perhaps SOFR plus 200. But again, that's not yet finalized. We're still, waiting to see what the Fed does in terms of pricing so that we have, the most stable index going forward. So stay tuned for that. The construction to permanent product, we will have as that typical two-note structure where the construction permanent piece will be one tranche. The balance, the construction only piece that intends to get paid down will be a separate tranche. Both of them will be indexed and provide fixed rate financing. We do have a deadline on this financing that these special rates will be utilized provided that the loan closes by November 30th. And that basically coincides with the CHFA budgeting process. That's not to say that we won't be able to offer the rates after that time frame, but we can't commit to longer than a single budget year for those specific rates. So again, we stand a better chance of committing to the rate when we know that the loan is going to close by November 30th. Again, the construction term it shouldn't exceed 24 months. The permanent term can be up to 35 years plus the 2 years for construction. Again, prepayment terms anytime after month 16, and typically the loan will begin amortizing in that 25th month. If there is some overall need to expand the construction term upfront, we have provided up to 30 or 35 month construction loans. However, they would be ineligible for the special pricing, but we will be able to entertain longer terms if the development needs it. Next slide. The permanent only product, again, this is an exciting feature. We can provide commitments for permanent only financing at your initial construction closing, and we would affirm the underwriting upon completion. Again, this would be fixed rate. In the past, I think we've used 10-year Treasury plus 330 to price this. Again, we're still working on that index model for this, but the goal would be to provide the commitment of the permanent loan financing at initial closing, and there will be, a one-time forward standby fee in conjunction with the financing, and then upon conversion, we would simply do a review underwrite of the transaction at that time before conversion. Next slide. Again, the loan will be sized to the current rents at the time of the construction closing, and we won't be trending those rates forward, for obvious reasons. The volatilities of AMIs and rent levels going forward just prevent us from trending forward a permanent loan amount. So we will be using, loans at the time of initial closing. We will not be utilizing commercial income. And again, that good faith forward deposit of 1% is still in play here. And just to reassure folks, taxable financing is in plentiful supply. There is no volume cap on taxable financing, so we do have the ability to issue as much as is necessary to assist developments. So as a non-scarce resource, it's really exciting to be able to utilize that to help these transactions. And next slide. So folks have asked, what the conversion process is like. We're not able to tell you yet. We've had a few that have closed, but not yet converted. We have a few of them that are going to be converting soon. But again, the goal would be to simply update the underwriting upon conversion, and with verification of 100% qualified occupancy and any other satisfaction of loan conditions from initial closing, we will convert, a one-time loan pay down of the construction loan, provided it's fully retired at conversion, and begin amortizing shortly thereafter. So with that, again, Debbie will be providing that outline of pre-application conferences. If you're thinking of CHFA financing, we'll be happy to participate in those discussions, and stay tuned for the product overviews that'll have the index pricing for all of the products for this round.
All right, thank you, Joe. So next up we have DOH. We have Kurt here with us, and I think we have some other staff that may be lurking.
Yeah, Miguel is online, so I can definitely start. And if he wants to jump in, good morning, everyone. For those that don't know me, I am Kurt Schoenrene with DOH Housing, and basically I'm here to go over what our side of this 9% round is going to entail. So as you guys can see, we are going to be making our 2023 subordinate financing just as last year went, with awards topping 100,000 per qualified unit, and that leads to a maximum of $4 million per project. What's different this year is there is going to be some federal resources available, so we would like just to outline, plan ahead for that potential source. The limits are a little bit lower, obviously, to 1.5 million per project, but with any federal resources, we are going to be needing our NEPA early and often. So I know there was a question earlier in the chat about Cipa. So those questions are definitely directed towards us at DOH Technical Services. So we can definitely provide that email if you don't have it. We all are also limiting our awards to one per developer, sponsor, owner. I think there was a question from Dan in the chat earlier about what we're going to do if you have open projects. So we are just looking to do one per for this round, but if you have open ones, we would like that to be done or financially closed out by March of next year. So obviously everyone's pipelines are a little jammed up, so we would definitely want to have conversation way before that date if you're worried. So I know those important dates were said real briefly earlier by Deb, but we can definitely go over those with the pre-application conferences that we'll be having. With our support, definitely we want to go over DOH requirements, but the most important thing is procurement. And in the past round of the development engagement process, we did go over DOH's requirements. They are available on our website, but it is one of those things that definitely, if you have questions, there is actually a very well done YouTube video about procurement done by JC, and it does go over what we're looking for as to planning. And obviously we can review your plan if you have questions, but it is something that our focus is to be ahead instead of asking back. So I do see someone with their hand raised.
Can you hear me?
It's
Can you
Miguel.
hear me?
Yes, Miguel, we can.
All right. Greetings from New Orleans as I'm attending the Council of State Development Agencies annual conference. Private area with some beautiful paintings behind me by a local artist. I do want to just add to Kurt's statement with regards to procurement that I think it would be most advisable for applicants to provide us their procurement plans during the preliminary application meetings. That would be very helpful. As you can see, we did identify and are making federal resources available earlier, given the experience we've had with 2021 and 2022 projects and the impact of COVID. So with that said, we really want to try to get ahead of that procurement question, which comes up quite often. We are going to be working very closely with our colleagues over at Chfa with regards to procurement standards. And we hope that everyone understands that if, very simply, if you don't plan on asking for any DOH funds, that's wonderful. But given the things that we've seen in the last couple of years because of the pandemic, we've had to utilize federal resources to help fill some gaps. So we need to really prepare for scenarios where federal resources are on the table for discussion, and that we be able to quickly mobilize and be able to aid you with filling a gap if necessary. Thank you. Back to you, Kurt. Doing a great job.
Well, thanks, Miguel. So I think we kind of jumped around a little bit there, Debbie, for the slides. So just as a reminder, if it is in the project is proposed to be in a flood zone, definitely, we need the Department of Energy or Deep, to sign off. So moving forward, next slide, please. We are asking for projects to come in with the debt and deferred developer fees set to maximum. That's just to obviously see what the proposal can handle. Obviously, with construction and as Joe alluded to, with the interest environment we're all working with, things can change quickly. So definitely plan ahead. And as I mentioned before, if you have 2 or more outstanding commitments from DOH side that have not closed before March 31st, then we will not be able to proceed with an award for this round. There is the Cipa submission right there, that link, and on our website there is an email address as well for questions. I would ask for questions that were related to NEPA to reach out to myself or to Miguel, and we can set you up with the right person going forward. Oh, Miguel's back with his hand.
Thank you, Kurt, for mentioning the Cipa. I do want to be transparent that the department is going to go through a small transition with our tech team. We are trying to assure that the Cipa email address that is specifically on the form will continue to be active. It will be going to myself and Lisa Quach, our new development housing manager as well. And we will make sure that reviews are done in a timely fashion. And we will coordinate with Chfa Tech with regards to notifying you where you are in that process. If you do have questions, I would say the sooner the better to put the Cipa in. If you ask that you submit those sooner than later, and we can have those conversations also during the preliminary meetings. So I just want to be honest and upfront. We hope to not give you the hiccups, but we will make every effort to accomplish that.
Thanks, Miguel. So when in doubt, definitely reach out to us, guys. You know, a question unanswered or unasked, you know, isn't going to help get you guys where you need to be next in this process. Speaking to that is definitely we want to be upfront and open, and with Chfa is our partner in this round as always. So we are going to be sharing resources as much as we can and reviewing concurrently. The deficiency period, as Debbie alluded to, there is not going to be one. So we definitely want to get ahead and before that submission date of January, when the 9% applications are due, we want to definitely be well reserved. So real briefly, we are going to be aligning our development engagement process with the 9% round. So those applications will open next week. So definitely, if you have any questions before then, reach out to me or Miguel, and then check out our website that will have there. I'm not sure if Debbie, is the 9% website for Chfa going to have the link to the DEP as well, or is it just going to link right to us?
I'm not sure. Terry, do you know?
So say that again, Cups. I'm not sure. I think the link that we have will be going right to the DEP, which will be the preliminary application.
Okay, perfect.
For the 9% round. So it's the same exact model that we're both using. It's just that the 9% will get funneled to Debbie, who will then set up conferences immediately thereafter. Ed?
Yeah, hi, just a couple of quick questions. So that was one of my questions from the beginning. Is there separate pre-apps with the DEP and CHFA, or we just do the DEP one and it goes to development engagement process and it goes to both your agencies?
Just
exactly. Just do the DEP. We're using that tool to be the same for the 9% process as well as for all other interested applications in the 4% or other DOH only funding.
Okay, thank you. And one follow up for Kurt. You mentioned that there was 1.5 million available just because, you know, developers are always hopeful. Is that on top of, in federal funds, is that on top of the 4 million, or would that be inclusive of the 4 million? And you're looking for people to take federal funds?
Well, they would be separate, and Miguel can speak to more details specifically, but that would be 5.5 if you're doing it. Obviously, with federal funds, we definitely want to look at the AMI spread and make sure you're planning ahead for compliance with what, you know, federal the prevailing wages and all that. So it is a total. It is not, the 4 million would not be subject to change. With that being said, there are different, you know, with your populations you're looking at to serve, there are other things. So if you have questions, we can definitely look at the 4 million for the state side, the DOH money.
This is Peter Wood. I have a question regarding those federal funds. I presume those will trigger Davis-Bacon wages for the entire project. And further, will you require a NEPA to be completed upon application? Typically, this is done later, but what's the expectation?
Hi, can you hear me, Kurt? Oh, thank
Yep,
you.
Miguel, you are there. Yep.
Oh, okay, thank you. Thank you so much for that question. The $4 million is the cap with regards to our state bond resources per project. The 1.5 million, up to the $1.5 million of federal resources will require a NEPA, to be honest. The reason why is we have potentially 3 funding sources: the National Housing Trust Fund that targets households at 30% AMI. That funding source itself does not trigger Davis-Bacon. So unless you have another trigger, maybe some other funding source, for example, project-based vouchers that would trigger your Davis-Bacon requirement, then that funding source would not need Davis-Bacon. Home and the home ARP allocations, those would trigger when we have assistance going to 12 or more units. The 1,500,000 per unit was taken into consideration as a guide, given that it would meet our rule of thumb, but also depending on the matrix of units, we would still be below our maximum home subsidy limits and National Housing Trust Fund limits.
Kurt, there was one other question before we move too far away.
Yep, I see it.
Do
Terry.
you see it? Okay, good.
Yeah, so Miguel, there is a chat. It's what they mean. Basically, it's asking what we mean by maximizing the deferred development fee and the debt upfront.
So in the past, when CHFA has reviewed these on behalf of DOH, we've used a rule of about 90% of what the property can carry for a DDF. That way it leaves some room in the underwriting for any changes that may occur. Miguel and Kurt, is that acceptable again this year?
That is correct, Debbie. I would want to say is, given how tight resources are, that I know in the past projects have sometimes gone after some additional funding sources outside of the original applications because they have a commitment. And then we're looking to apply those newly funded awards into reducing their deferred developer fee. Given the volatility of the construction market, we would be having a follow-up conversation, Deb, with you as well, right before the, during the preliminary conversations, that if additional funding sources do get committed, that those sources are committed specifically towards construction and not towards reducing the deferred developer. Because that's also part of our award structure, is it not? I believe for scoring.
There's some leveraging points, but yeah, there's no points for a deferred developer fee.
Hi, Debbie, it's Lou again. My computer cut out a little bit. I just wanted to confirm what maximizing the deferred developer fee. Is it still within the CHFA parameters of available cash flow over 15 years and no more than 50% of the gross fee?
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
Got it. And then just as a follow-up to, I think Peter's question regarding the NEPA timing, I think Miguel said that the NEPA would be required, but I just wasn't clear. It wasn't clear to me when it would be required. Would it be required as part of the application or at some point later?
I would say that we would want to try to time it as part of the application submission. So when we have, we can start the clock at that time, at the same time as Chfa with regards to the review. Was there another question that came up on NEPA?
Yeah,
Just-
Miguel,
There's
yep, sorry, there is. Sorry, Debbie. So should
ahead.
people be contacting the Cipa email for NEPA questions as well, just for the short term, Miguel, or do you directly? I just didn't want to
You
give
know,
out your
that-
email in case.
That would be a good clearing house. Just in the interim, if they can CC me as well, but that way we can collect any and all Cipa NEPA questions and make sure that those are communicated out through any FAQ updates.
Okay, so for folks who are not in the chat, I'm gonna put it in the chat, but also say it out loud. That email address that we are talking about for questions is going to be doh.cipa, CEPA @ct.gov. And thanks for these questions, by the way. So that was pretty much all I had, Debbie. Miguel, is there anything else for now? Oh, the DEP is going to run. So definitely, if when that opens next week, if you have questions, you can contact me or Nathan Carnes for anything. So we don't like blow up Miguel too much. He's having fun down in New Orleans.
Very considerate of you.
Well, no, this is all work, Kurt. It's all work. But I just want to emphasize, Kurt, that we are identifying, and it was on the slides, that if you do have two or more open projects that have yet to reach a financial closing, let's please bring up an update if you are submitting for another activity during the pre-application phase. We should have those conversations soon.
And those are applications that have a DOH request outstanding.
Correct.
If there's no DOH request, then it doesn't count. CHFA does not have that same requirement. All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Everyone have a beautiful day.
You too, Miguel.
Bye-bye.
All right, our friends Marina and Todd from the State Historic Preservation Office are up. Do you want to do your own slides or do you want me to?
Yeah, Debbie, do you mind if I just share? It's probably easier.
Yeah, I think so.
All right. And slides are up. Everybody can see them. Nod, yes, thumbs up.
No, we see a black screen.
Black.
You see a black screen? All right, hold on one second.
Hopefully that's not the slide.
No, I don't think so. Thanks, Kurt.
Yeah, we're going to fade in. We're slowly, very slowly fading from black. This might take a little while.
It's a star wipe.
There you go.
How about better? All right.
There we go. All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Todd Levine. I'm an architectural historian for the State Historic Preservation Office.
And I'm Marina Wisniewski, preservationist for the State Historic Preservation Office, and we are here to discuss regulatory compliance as it applies to SHPO when you apply for Chfa programs.
Normally, we would give an overview of our process and wait to see if there are any questions, but we thought we'd take this opportunity to answer the questions we get asked most often up front, such as, who are you and why do I have to talk to you? And also, how do I get around you? No, I'm kidding.
But before we get there, I want to highlight what our priorities in the process are. There are two major priorities. One, to preserve historic fabric, and two, to do so while encouraging an efficient review process. So that begs the first common question.
What is historic fabric? So fun fact, I did absolutely no preparation for this presentation, so I have no idea will be in the script. Yeah, thanks, Marina. Thanks for putting that in there. You guys ever see Ron Burgundy, where he reads whatever on the teleprompter? Well, that just happened as unprompted. Thanks, buddy. That's great. The actual fun fact that I had known was going to be there was it's not just places where George Washington slept, although he did sleep around. But that joke doesn't land anymore because of what just happened. But go ahead now, Marina. Oh, it's still me. Okay. It's all of the examples and many more. Historic fabric is what makes up historic resources, which for regulatory purposes are properties listed on either the State Register of Historic Places or National Register of Historic Places, or determined by our office to be eligible for listing. Remember that phrase, I'm going to say it a lot. They can come in all shapes and sizes and from different time periods. They can be an individual property like the New London Harbor Light in the middle, or an historic district like Litchfield Center in the lower left. They can also be archaeological resources, which means underground, or objects like the red-orange stegi in Hartford there. Speaking of which,
And answer another common question. Why do I have to talk to you? So short answer, it's the law, or rather several laws. The National Historic Preservation Act of 1966 established a multifaceted approach to recognizing and protecting our shared history. As part of this, a process of review was established under Section 106 of this act, which requires that any project necessitating federal action, be it funding, permitting, property transfer, or others, evaluate how that action will impact historic resources. Connecticut has a similar law, the Connecticut Environmental Policy Act, which requires that any project that utilizes state or federal funds or permitting consider its effect to historic resources. The State Historic Preservation Office was created as part of the National Historic Preservation Act and conducts these reviews based on the information submitted. As you guys, as Miguel referenced, a lot of these Chfa projects will also maybe utilize Department of Housing funding and then also that federal funding. So in an effort to streamline, we utilize a single review process for both state and federal review.
all right, so this is our project notification form. This is how you submit a review. It's available on our website, ct.gov/historic-preservation, or you can email us and we'll send you a copy. Reviews must be sent hard copy to the address on the form. However, we are also accepting digital copies emailed to us, but a hard copy must also be sent. If you guys are backed up against a time wall, then email us certainly, but you always got to follow up with a hard copy. Form is fairly straightforward. It includes information such as a location of the project, who's proposing the project. Here at Shippo, we call that the project proponent, the scope of the project, and what state or federal agencies are involved. This last point is very important. Knowing where your permit or funds are coming from help us know under which laws this project is being reviewed. For Chfa applicants, you already know the agency and you know which program you're applying for. As part of your funding package, you may also have HUD funding, so that would be reviewed under Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act. LIHTC is a state program, so it's reviewed under the Policy Act. If you don't know, ask the agency you're applying to, but when in doubt, send it in. It's very important for you to complete the form. Incomplete forms delay the process because we have to try to figure out what you're doing and why. Note on the red box that's outlined in this section, it's called project description. That space is for a quick summary of the project. You will probably not be able to describe the entire project within the box, but that's okay. That's not what it's there for. It's just to give us a general idea of what you're doing. For instance, is it new construction of a 4-story building? Is it rehabilitation of an old mill? Please do not put see attached. We're definitely going to look at everything, but if we receive the submittal, the first thing we're going to do is look at this box. I've begun sending emails to people telling them if you don't fill it out, we're going to send it back as incomplete. And I'm actually doing reviews right now, and I'm sending people their last warning. We're going to get to a point where I'm just going to I'm just not going to accept them. So please make sure you fill it out, because we get too many of these. We do like 2,500, 3,000 of these a year, and it's Marina and I for above ground. We have 2 other archaeologists. So you got to fill it out. Please fill it out. The attachments should be anything that you think that would help us understand the project. If you have drawings of renovation work, include that. If you have a building that's new on an open parcel, include the soil map, which is a requirement for archaeological review. The more you share with us, the more likely we won't have to ask for more information, which will delay a final determination from our office. Speaking of which, it's important for you to plan ahead and allow enough time for the project to be reviewed. If you have submitted a complete application, general review time is about 30 days. However, if you do not include all the information, we'll have to reach out to you, which will take more time. Rule of thumb, the more complete an application is, the less time it is the review. And if you're scheduling, at least 90 days in advance, you should be okay. But if you miss that deadline, we're going to have a problem.
So the next most common question, when do I hear back from you? If you filled out the form correctly and we have all the information we need, you can expect a letter from us within 30 days. Normally we mail hard copies, but increasingly we're sending electronic letters to help expedite reviews. The letter has 4 possible outcomes or a determination of effect. The first one, which is what 90% of our letters say, is no historic properties affected. This means exactly what it says. There are not any historic properties that will be impacted by the project, and you're good to go. The second one is no adverse effect. This means that there is a historic property that will be affected, but nothing that would negatively impact its historic fabric or its historic integrity. The third possible outcome is a conditional no adverse effect. This means that there is a historic property that the majority of the project won't negatively impact the resource, but there are 1 or 2 items in the project scope that should be modified to avoid harming the resource. An example of this could include retaining rather than replacing architectural trim, using a more compatible material for a new addition, reconfiguring parking so that it doesn't disturb archaeological resources, or other very project-specific items. Conditional no adverse effects are usually issued after we've reached out and spoken with the project proponent. This is a way for us to get you a letter without having to resubmit the project and to help keep the process moving. The last possibility, which neither we nor the project proponent want, and the one that no one wants, is an adverse effect. An adverse effect is found when an undertaking, quote, may alter directly or indirectly any of the characteristics of a historic property that qualify the property for inclusion in the National Register in a manner that would diminish the integrity of the property's location, design, setting, materials, workmanship, feeling, or association. For state-funded projects, this definition also applies to state register properties. It's a long definition, but basically it's a project that will harm a resource.
So what if the finding is an adverse effect? Bad news, everyone. It means you have to have a deeper conversation with us to resolve the adverse effect. And we have to resolve it. It's a must in law. So we have to resolve it. So there are basically 3 ways we do that. Avoidance, minimization, and mitigation. Marina just tried to trick me with one of her things there, but I read ahead. Anyway, avoidance is where we're always going to start in any project that's a potential adverse effect, which means don't do it. Find a different way to incorporate your needs into a project while keeping the historic building intact. And we're going to push hard and heavy every time there's this opportunity for avoidance. The second option is called minimization. And that's pretty niche. It's when you have a project and you can somehow minimize the adverse effect. So you miss the threshold of an adverse effect. It could be, okay, maybe we're going to minimize it by, not demoing the whole building, but maybe just removing a porch or something like that. And then finally, it's mitigation. Now, mitigation compensates the preservation community for loss. Mitigation is usually and mostly intentionally has a heavy toll. When we do mitigation for a loss of an historic resource, we want the project proponent to feel it because we don't want them to do it again. We want them to go out of their way to avoid the adverse effect. And in fact, not incorporate costs for mitigation into their project.
So the first option, avoidance, is pretty easy to do if you follow the earlier advice to plan ahead. Part of this is to be cognizant of what resources you have at the outset. And there's a book on how to do it. It's called the Secretary of Interior's Standards for the Treatment of Historic Properties. The standards is your manual for how to treat historic properties and is free. And you can download a copy at mps.gov. And I can send this in email, or I can send the slides, mps.gov/TPS/standards. But wait, there's more.
That's right, Marina. I'm going to, let's see, what am I going to do? I'm going to skip reading that and just say that come to us early and often, right? Anytime you guys have a project that you're coming up with and that may have an impact on a historic property, call us. We'd rather do a site visit and have the project not come to fruition than wait till we have an adverse effect. You guys spent 90% drawings, and 20 grand on drawings that now you got to redo.
For anybody who's into soft rock, that image is a real deep cut single. So I put that up there for anybody who's into 10,000 Maniacs. But please do come to us and talk to us early and often. I really do love talking about this stuff. And ask any question you want for however long you want.
Because SHPO loves people. Everybody knows that. We love people. We prioritize people, not the resource, people.
So in addition to reaching out to us directly, there are other resources that you can access to gain more information on any historic property in your project area. Digitally, the National Archives holds all National Park Service records up to 2012 for properties that are listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Our office has a spreadsheet of all properties listed on the National and State Register of Historic Places in the lower 4 counties up to 2017. We are also in the process of digitizing all of our records, which includes national registers, state registers, surveyed properties, archaeological surveys, and something that is called Concris. And we hope to roll that out in a beta to the public by the end of the year. So you will only have to visit one site. It's very exciting for nerds who like history. For anything that does not fit within those parameters, you can also request to view our paper files. Normally, we're very flexible regarding researchers. Right now, we're only doing Wednesday appointments, so you'll have to schedule something. Our office also administers several financial incentive programs for the rehabilitation of historic properties, including the Federal Rehabilitation Tax Credit Program and the State Rehabilitation Tax Credit Program, which offer a 20% and 25% credit on eligible expenses, respectively. Some of you may have used them on other projects, and as a bonus, projects that include an affordable housing component that meets the particular definition required by the state get an extra 5% credit. That work has to be pre-approved, which fits right into the plan ahead of guidance. Properties must also be listed to take advantage of these programs, so you can check out those resources, the MPS and the SHPO database, or feel free to reach out to us. If you are interested in applying for historic tax credits and are utilizing any of these programs at Chfa, DOH, HUD, our tax credit coordinator, Julie Carmelik, will be your primary contact. She will do both the compliance review that we're discussing today, and then she will also be the person reviewing your tax credit project. So we've thrown a lot of information at you in a very short amount of time. So let's recap with a checklist that you should all keep in mind. So 1, reach out to us early.
Most important part.
2, check to see if you already have a historic resource in your project scope.
Either through the databases or reach out to us directly.
3, consider if the project will utilize historic tax credits or other incentives.
And if you are, be sure to read the requirements on our website at ct.gov/historic-preservation.
4, fill out the project notification form.
And please don't put C attached. I will send it back as incomplete.
Compile any ancillary documents.
Give us anything you think that may be helpful and anything you don't want us to have to ask for later.
Mail in a hard copy.
The address is on the last slide.
Supply additional information if requested.
If you did everything above, we won't need to ask for additional information and you will have saved yourself a step. But thanks everyone for being so attentive. And if you have any questions, here we are. No questions. Right. Awesome. That was great.
Thank you very much. Next up, we have Tani with the Department of Housing to talk about Section 811.
Yep. Thanks, Debbie, for returning back to your slides. Always so tough to follow. Todd and Marina, you do a great job. And note to myself that I need to add memes and GIFs to my slides next year. So I'll keep this short, sweet, and simple. I'm Tani Fo. I'm a housing specialist at Department of Housing. And for the purposes of this overview session, I am your go-to person for all things Section 811 project-based rental assistance, or we call it CT 811 here. So CT 811 Basics, it's a HUD program, so it's a federal project-based rental assistance program intended for persons with disabilities. And DOH administers the program. We're the lead grantee, but we have a strong partnership with this grant with other agencies like Chfa TSS, DEMIS, and OPM as well. The 811 PRA or CT 811 program, it provides rental subsidies for gross rents up to the applicable HUD FMR for that project location. Now, can it exceed HUD FMR? Yes, you must have an approved Section 8 rent comp study attached with your request in order for us to exceed HUD FMR. If you've seen recently, those FMR rates have just been released for the new year. And we are currently working with our second grant for this program. Our first round in fiscal year, HUD's fiscal year 13, generated a grant amount of a little over $4 million. We have 7 projects in the program with about a little over 70 units total. So as you can see, it's a fairly small program, but it's so far been very successful. Once a project is up and running and units are filled, we're finding a lot of stability amongst residents, and certainly when there's turnover amongst those units, we work closely with property management to refill the units with more eligible participants. So the first grant has been fully encumbered. We are working now with our second grant, which was awarded in August of 2020, awarded just under $7 million. And so August 2020 is, wow, of course, 2 years ago, but we are still currently accepting applications on a rolling basis due to, of course, COVID and staffing changes at the HUD level. It's been a little bit of a slow rollout of the program at the HUD level. However, it's an existing program that's been in operations for about 7 or 8 years now. So it's certainly a program that we are both familiar with at the state level and at the federal level. So we are very much looking forward to the rollout of those $7 million. In a nutshell, we are in search of new construction, rehab, or existing projects can also qualify if there is adequate turnover. So just to go over some of the project requirements, the 811 subsidies are available to no more than 25% of the project. That's an emphasis on community integration. We are not looking to place the subsidies into a project fully intended for persons with disabilities. The idea is placing units and placing the subsidies into locations where persons with disabilities have the opportunity to integrate with the community. So once you are under a contract, it's called a rental assistance contract or a RAC. And the RAC is an agreement between the Department of Housing and the project owner for a term of 20 years. And that includes a recorded use agreement that's required for a minimum of 30 years. Funding is available in 5-year funding cycles. So the grant award of $7 million that I just mentioned on the previous slide is that initial 5-year funding cycle. After that, the subsidies are renewed annually and is subject to congressional appropriations. And again, all the way going up to 20 years under the contract. So Davis-Bacon, I heard that mentioned briefly earlier. So same thing here with a federal program. There's a threshold of 12 units that would trigger Davis-Bacon labor standards. Uniform physical condition standards or UPCS inspections are required every 3 years. Certainly if you're a tax credit awardee, you are subject to those standard inspections already. So no surprises there. And environmental reviews are required. Now it's a little different from the full NEPA review that we were just discussing earlier as well. So rather than a full NEPA review, what the program guidelines for the 811 program requires is that we conduct an analysis, and it really just takes the important parts of Part 50 and Part 58 and ensures the analysis is to ensure that the project is in compliance with those HUD environmental tenets. So if you're interested in that particular portion, because while it is not a full NEPA review, it's close to it. The program guidelines provide a lot of details on what's required as far as compliance with those environmental tenets. If you do have a project you're interested in bringing forward that already has this HUD assistance, that pretty much means that you'll be going through that review anyway. So it's not required specifically for the 811 component when you're already HUD assisted. Next slide, please. All right, so which properties are eligible for the 811 assistance? It's any new or existing property, which for multifamily, that's defined of at least 5 units, and it can be owned by a housing authority, nonprofit, or private entity. And very importantly, the development costs can be paid with any public or private resource except Section 202 and 811 capital advances. And if you're familiar with those two programs, the reason for this exception is because 202 and 811 are specifically funding for projects for the elderly or persons with disabilities. So again, it goes back to that integration component. If the properties already or the units are already subject to a use agreement for persons with disabilities or for the elderly, it would not be eligible for the 811 program. So other reasons why a project, or I should say units, are not eligible for CT 811 are units that are receiving long-term operating subsidies in the last 6 months, and that's an example of that are other Section 8 project-based programs. And much like I said earlier, senior restricted units or units that already have restricted use for persons with disabilities. I'll add a little bit more to that in that if you don't necessarily have a use restriction but have a preference for persons with disabilities, say in your application process, persons with disabilities are prioritized, that particular preference would disqualify that unit from CT 811. So as you can see that not eligible portion there on the slide, it talks specifically about the units not qualifying. So in actuality, a project can still qualify so long as the 811 assistance is not layered onto units that also have those particular restrictions. So you can have a property with mixed use in which it's either mixed use because of the population restrictions or mixed subsidy resources. So there is a possibility that 811 can still be, in that operation mix. We do have some preferred features in the projects that we are seeking. So near public transportation and access to community service, because we are working with populations with disabilities. Efficiency and 1-bedroom units are preferred since generally speaking, most of our qualified households are single individuals, although we do have use for up to 2-bedroom units as we do assist small families. Anything beyond that is less likely needed. So again, if you keep your proposal to efficiency in 1-bedroom units or a few 2-bedroom units, that's always preferred. Accessible or adaptable units are a preference, again, simply because of the population group that we're working with, which I'll go over more who those population groups are. And we are also seeking management agencies with federal project-based housing and HUD systems experience. So I do see a lot of familiar names, and I know likely most of the folks on this session today are developers and project owners, but we do look for you to partner with management agencies that have experience with project-based federal programs for the reason that, this subsidy, once we're under contract, really doesn't even come into play until you have once your development is fully constructed and you have applicants referred to the property. And of course, once they're housed, being able to manage monthly vouchering and annual recertification. So it is an administrative lift on the management side. So working with someone with experience is a benefit, for the owner and for the property itself. Certainly, though, we've worked with management agencies with less experience, and we're happy to go through training to get them up to speed. All right, and as promised, I wanted to talk about who would be eligible to actually live in the CT 811 units if the project itself is under contract. So eligible households are extremely low income individuals and families, so that's the 30% AMI level, with at least one individual who has a qualifying disability and is between the ages of 18 and 62. So there you see demonstrated that it is not a program intended for the elderly. They can, of course, age in place so long as they move in at the time of move-in are eligible for the program. Certainly, if they turn 62 the next day, that's perfectly fine. So we work with 3 different target populations under our CT 811 grant, and that's where we work closely with our interagency partners to gather these qualified referrals whenever we do have a project that has just finished construction, or we have units that are under turnover at an existing property. So first are persons who are experiencing homelessness or at risk of homelessness through the state's Coordinated Access Network, or the CAN. Hopefully you're all very familiar with the CAN, but there will be more on that later in this presentation. Secondly, persons who are eligible for the state's Money Follows the Person program. It's a program administered through the Department of Social Services. So those are folks who are institutionalized, looking for community placement. And then lastly, we work with adults diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. They specifically receive assistance or services under a Medicaid waiver, and that's also through coordination with the Department of Social Services as well. All right, and this ties to one of the questions I saw earlier in the chat. 811 PRA tenants are connected to support services. So, prior to their referral, once we're getting their names off our waiting list and connecting them to the property, making that referral, all along that process, they are connected to services even after getting housed. This can entail things like housing coordination, security deposit assistance, and those community-based long-term care services. So that question we saw earlier, are developers required to have a support services plan and services provider if you are going the 811 track for your support services, or I'm sorry, your services supportive housing unit set aside? I answered in the chat, no, you do not, simply because 811 tenants are attached to services. However, there's no harm and perhaps a benefit to both those tenants and your tenants in your entire property to have a relationship with the service provider, as much as that connection is made and services follow the residents. It doesn't replace having an on-service a service provider in place at the property. So that's something to consider if you have room in your operations to have that relationship with an on-site service provider, but it is not required. All right, so how does this all come together in the QAP? So as we mentioned many times, there's no changes from the QAP last year. If you look at the QAP directly, you won't see mention of the CT 811 program itself, but it is explained in the Supportive Housing Guide, which is a supplemental guide to the QAP specifically for those who are looking to include supportive housing in their projects. So there's two areas with that you can hit in order to get some points when you're participating in 811, and that is the supportive housing units, which basically if you're participating in 811, that's deemed as an equivalent. It's deemed as an equivalent to the inclusion of traditional supportive housing. Traditional meaning how we've seen it, many, many years, including a supportive housing set aside, partnering with a supportive housing provider with those units. So now if you are participating in CT 811, you're essentially fulfilling that specific proposal by having those rental subsidies for supportive housing individuals and having the services component included with that. The second area is having deep income targeted units. So again, as I mentioned, qualified 811 residents are at 30% AMI level. So there you already have that deep income targeted units, which are often layered with CT 811 subsidies. And again, as further explained in the supportive housing guideline, participation in supportive housing guideline, as well as the QAP under the supportive housing component. Participation in CT 811 under the guidelines require a minimum commitment of 10% and a maximum commitment of 25%. Again, that's the limitation at the federal level. Service funding, service plans, again, are not a requirement, not applicable with participation in CT 811. And projects are subject to HUD's management and occupancy reviews. Again, that's something that weighs heavily on the management side of the program. All right, so how to apply for CT 811. It's hopefully when you receive these slides there, the link is embedded there on that first line. It leads you directly to the Department of Housing website where you can pull up a project application. Again, those are being accepted on a rolling basis. If selected for participation, the project owners enters into what's called an agreement to enter into a rental assistance contract, or an ARAC. And that ARAC simply specifies that upon acceptable completion of the project, the owner and DOH will enter into a full rental assistance contract for the purposes of making those rental assistance payments. So again, as you can see, this is a rental subsidy resource. So the commitment can happen in advance, but there's really no source of funding flowing to the property until eligible tenants are leased up. So as it ties to the tax credit applications, in order to show that you have a commitment of CT 811, LIHTC applicants selected for participation in 811 must include either the executed ARAC or an equivalent letter of intent. We also provide both if that's the timing is fitting for that. So much like Todd and Marina emphasize reaching out to them early, same thing here. I do encourage you to reach out. I've had a lot of meetings with my developers early on. At no point is it too early to have this conversation. Although there's much to review in between, we want to make sure it's a project that's vetted through our interagency group. It's a location that their targeted populations are interested in. So having that opportunity to review thoroughly with our interagency group is appreciated. So again, I am the main point of contact for all things top and down for 811. My name, email, and phone number are listed there. And if you have any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat, but I think we do have that Q&A session later on. So if we need to move on, Debbie, please feel free to do so.
All right, thank you so much, Tani. And thanks to everyone that's hung with us this long. We have a few more speakers, but I do expect that we should be finished up by 12:30. Next up, we have Josh from the Department of Developmental Services.
Thanks so much, Debbie, and it's great to be here with you all. And I'll just do the next slide. And I want to tell you that I'm from the Department of Developmental Services, and we partner with individuals and their families on lifelong planning to help people live full lives as valued members of their community. And housing has become such an important cornerstone of that. Go ahead. Over the last several years, we've really focused on moving from the congregate-based supports to more community-based supports, supporting people where they live in their family homes or their own homes. And the move from the types of supports that people think of as institutional has been occurring over several decades. And you see on the right of that slide, if you have a video, that those are the public supports that we provide that people might think of as more institutional in nature. And over on the far left are those in-home supports that we're talking about today. And we're talking about people with developmental disabilities living full lives in their communities. Next slide, please. Housing supports for DDS can be funded as part of a comprehensive residential service, what people often think of as group home living when someone lives in a group home, and we call that a community living arrangement or CLA, but it can also be funded separately, and DDS participates in the Interagency Committee on Supportive Housing, and through that we've explored a couple of different avenues towards housing development. And now we want to talk about our population as a supported population through the low-income housing tax credit process, where a developer would partner with one of the DDS providers to provide supports to our population. Next slide, please. So our goals are to expand access to integrated, affordable, supportive housing, to strengthen the linkages between the housing and service providers, to demonstrate the effectiveness of smart home and other assistive technologies, and also to support the move from that institutional level of care to living as full members of the community. Next slide, please. So to do that, we want to reduce the number of people that are living in those congregate types of settings and increase the number of people living in these integrated, affordable, supportive housing settings. We need to implement assistive technology strategies to improve the outcomes, to let people become as independent as possible while they can still maintain and even enhance their health and safety through the use of some of those technologies that can be non-invasive but available when people need them. And we don't want to always rely on the paid staff person to be in the unit with the individual, because that can be very invasive. You want paid staff for meaningful interactions, but not just to be there because someone needs to be there to maybe watch you cook if you can use something like a stove guard, or help you take your medications if you can use something like a med minder to assist you with that. And we also want to not only increase the number of people receiving these types of supports, but increase the number of people receiving supports while decreasing the per person costs, because the costs for supporting people in integrated settings are significantly lower, and we can maybe support, you know, up to 3 people for the cost of 1 person in that other type of setting. And everyone's unique and has a different level of care, but generally speaking, it's much more cost effective, and people, we believe, have better outcomes living in the types of developments that you all are looking at building. Next slide, please. So what are the folks that are supported by DDS looking for? What are these people want? What do they want? The same things that we want. They want safe and affordable housing. In this case, they need some additional supports, and some of us may. We don't know that. They want easy access to transportation. We heard a little bit earlier about transit-oriented, but of course, there's a whole continuum of access to transportation. And it's important for people who may not have the ability to operate their own vehicle to have access to the things that are important for them to live their life. They need to live near community, and they need to be part of a community and have work opportunities. And what we've seen is that shared and mixed use space in these developments can be an incredible catalyst for the community to come together. And our providers are often doing programming for the entire development, not just for the DDS individuals. So they want community inclusion and participation. And in terms of the physical environment, universal design principles go a long way with folks with disabilities across a whole continuum of needs, but accessible or accessible ready is often what folks are looking for. Next slide, please. And, you know, what do we look for in our providers? If you're a developer and you're looking at DDS providers to partner with, what you would need to know is that we have qualified providers, and that the provider would need to be qualified to provide in-home supports. They need to be enrolled as a Medicaid performing provider and in good standing with an active certification status with DDS. They need to be willing to take innovative approaches to community-based support. Some of the things I was talking about, like using assistive technology, are considered innovative, and not everyone is using them, although they're becoming much, much more common across our service delivery system. And we need them to be willing to partner with the housing developer in an initiative such as this. Next slide, please. So key elements of successful developments for DDS are that less than 25% or no more than 25% of all the units in the development are supported, and that it's a person-centered and person-driven living environment where the people who live there, who are DDS supported, are making their decisions about how they live within that space and where they live, how they, of course, they have autonomy in their living space and decorate their space as they wish. There's an economy of scale in service delivery because we can support several people in one location. And when I say location, I mean development, not just one space in the development or one area, but interspersed throughout the development. That there is on-site staffing available, and we typically are looking for the ability to have an overnight staff available who would be on site and be able to assist individuals if they need that at that time. And this says the ability to age in place, but we might just say change in place, that we all go through changes, and sometimes people have short-term mobility crises, and sometimes they might just have to adapt to long-term changes in their ability to ambulate. And so we'd be looking for places where people would be able to stay if they go through that. And that there's a continuum of support needs and a strong provider and developer relationship. Thanks. Next slide. In terms of funding, we had received in the past a large appropriation to do a demonstration project, and people often refer, the branding was so good with IDASH that people call all of our supportive housing IDASH, but it isn't. IDASH was a NOFA driven program that the Department of Housing operated, and there were 3 developments that came out of the IDASH. Ongoing, we're looking at through the different mechanisms that have been discussed before, going into the low-income housing tax credits, and that has been working very well for DDS providers partnering with developers, and we would look to continue that. In terms of rental assistance, there's been a combination of different things that we've had. So we have our own in-house rental subsidy program that we operate that is really supposed to be a bridge to getting public housing funding. And in addition to that, we have an allocation of rental subsidy funding that is managed through John D. Amelia and Associates on behalf of the Department of Housing for these types of developments. When we commit project-based funding, that's the type of funding that it is. And that can be project-based or resident-based. But typically, what we're talking about here is the project-based RAPs that if a developer is partnering with a DDS provider, they're typically looking for DDS to commit rental assistance to supportive units for a period of 15 years, and we write a commitment letter to the developer. There can be new waiver funding, which DDS operates 3 Medicaid waivers. Sometimes we could get new funding for special programs. We get funding for a growth every year as the programs grow, and we do a lot with what's called existing or recycled or portable funds. And that's something that's unique with DDS, that people have control of their resources and they can use their funds to purchase the supports as they wish and elect, and that's where portability comes in. And then we also, when people move from one setting to another and funds reduce, we're able to recycle those funds. So those are the main funding mechanisms that we utilize. Next slide, please. I think everyone knows the supportive housing guideline, but I just put a picture of it there in case you don't. From 2017 to 19, we implemented the IDASH program, and there were 3 developments, as I mentioned. And then so far since 2019, we've been able to participate in low-income housing tax credits, and we have supported projects that are both in the 9% and in the 4% realm. And there are 4 developments so far that have been awarded, and we're looking forward to more, hopefully in the future. Next slide, please. With that, I'll just say thank you. Appreciate your time. If you have questions, you can reach out to me, and that is my contact information.
Thank you very much, Josh.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Steve with the Department of Housing to talk about the Interagency Council on Supportive Housing and Homelessness.
Great. Thanks, Debbie. Thanks for everybody for having me today to talk about the Coordinated Access Network and the special set-aside population that we have in the 9% round for this. This has been around for a bunch of years now, so I'm sure many of you who are experienced developers and have applied for the tax credits before are familiar with this presentation, but I will provide the information updated so everybody is on the same page. So as many folks know, we have 7 coordinated access networks across the state. The role of the, as we call them, the CANs, is to identify those individuals, households experiencing homelessness and provide them on a path to permanent housing. Working with CHFA, we've been able to create units that are specifically dedicated for the homeless population, in which developers and property managers will access the CANs for referrals for those vacant units or those new units when they come online. So I know it has been difficult in some instances to be able to gain proper referrals in a timely fashion, and this is why we're trying to improve that status by working directly with DOH staff, specifically our 3 CAN managers at DOH who have direct connections with the CANs and can work with them to give any property that has a vacancy the number of referrals needed to be able to fill them. So as you can see, if there is a vacancy, so when the project is built or when there is turnover, if the property manager or the developer could contact one of our 3 CAN managers, or actually one of our 2 CAN managers, one is a data person, to let them know of the vacancy, the CAN manager will then work with the appropriate CAN to identify an individual or a household that would be eligible for that unit. In addition, we have a bunch of service providers throughout the state that also provide case management support to those folks that are going into these units, which obviously allows for any needs to be met for those individuals so that they can successfully live independently in these projects. You can go to the next slide. And this is a quick one. As you can see, here are our 3 CAN managers. However, the 2 that really will be working directly with any project would be Lee and Kara. Bo is our data person, so he's great at what he does, but Lee and Kara will be the ones that would be able to provide the referral source for the CANs to fill any vacant units. So there you have their contact information, a little more detail. Lee is responsible for the CANs in New Haven, as well as Northwest and the Middletown area. Kara is responsible for Hartford and New Britain, as well as Fairfield County, and either of them would be able to help in the eastern part of the state. Go on to the next slide. So what Kara and Lee are really going to need from any development in order to fill that slot when they become open is just basically some basic information, just where that development is located, the name of it, obviously the name of the property manager and the owner developer, and specifically what their target population is. Within DOH and the homeless services, there are a bunch of different target populations. For example, we've had chronically homeless, and those are the individuals who have been homeless for a year or more and who have a disability. However, as we look today, we are doing very, very well on our chronic numbers. We have less than 20 chronically homeless individuals in the state that are not matched to a housing resource. So that's great. So if you're one of the older projects and have a chronic preference, just let us know and we can work with you to fill with an appropriate referral. We also do provide housing assistance through this to families as well, homeless families, as well as homeless youth defined as 18 to 26, or just homeless adults who may not be chronic. We know that when these projects are developed, there are a wide variety of unit types that are created. They can be 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, so on and so forth. So we just need to know what type of unit is available, and we can go from there to refill that information, refill those units with the proper information to Kara and Lee. And clearly, Kara and Lee, they will know exactly what, once they're informed of what that target population is, they will work with their local CAN to identify individuals or families that would be able to meet those criteria. Luckily, unluckily, actually, our lists are long, so we have enough folks to be able to fill these units. Hopefully, we'll get to the day where we don't have long lists, and it will become more difficult when we can move on to other eligible populations, like our friends Josh at DDS. But for now, we do have extensive lists, so we should be able to fill any available units with an eligible household. So we greatly work with you to make sure that we fill those units as needed. Also, if there are any specific rules within the development, that would be helpful to know, because then we can screen out before it gets to the property. So that would actually save some time. So if there are any criminal justice or any eviction history information that that project may need, it would be good to let us know that, so we can take the appropriate steps to give referrals that make sense for the development, as opposed to just starting the process over again. And clearly, the earlier you know any unit that is going to become available, the better it is to let us know. So if you know that unit may become available November 1st right now, that would be great, because we know it takes time to get all these processes completed. So the earlier the better. That way we can hopefully minimize any underutilized units, having empty units for any given month. And here's just a quick map of our geography. Those are the 7 CAMs we talked about. I think everybody's probably pretty familiar. If you have any questions about any particular city, the next slide will show that. So when you look at the slideshow, you'll be able to identify it. Otherwise, if you have any questions or concerns, you can clearly ask me or contact Kara and Lee with that contact information before. So I just want to make it quick and get you guys moving a little bit quicker. And for anybody, when you speak homeless, here is a nice little acronyms that helps you understand what the heck we are saying when we start spouting off a bunch of letters.
All right, thanks, Steve. And last but not least, we have Chris Pollock with CHFA to discuss the Sharepoint and consolidated application processes.
All right, so this will be quick and easy, because there aren't a whole lot of major changes that have happened between last year and this year. So first I'll talk about Sharepoint. Some of the features that are in Sharepoint is there's a checklist or a task list where you can assign tasks, but it's really more of a way to submit your application. So once all the items in the task list get checked off, it'll essentially be your application is going to get submitted and the site will lock down. The sites also have a built-in consolidated application, so you can use that to fill out your application, download it onto your device, fill it out there, and then re-upload when you're done. There's a bunch of different ways you can do it. There's also a reference library section, and that has all the associated templates and fillable forms that would be needed to be submitted with your application. And what the Sharepoint site is, it's an application-specific website that allows an unlimited number of users or multiple team members to upload files as needed for your submission. So to get access to it, you just send an email request to applicationrequest@chfa.org and let us know some basic information kind of listed here. Each application that is going to be submitted will need its own site, so it will have to have its own email be sent for it. Give us a couple days to create the website, so that way we can make sure we're going through appropriately and we've got a little bit of time to get them sent out. And once it's made, you'll receive an email with an invitation to access the application-specific website. If you've never used SharePoint before and you don't have a Microsoft account, you'll have to set one up to be able to use that as your login information for SharePoint. So like I said, the task list has got a list of associated tasks. They can be assigned to certain team members. They can be essentially used as a timeline to see what's going on with the process. So I was just working on it earlier, and I included today's overview session, all the different dates that Debbie had mentioned before about different pre-application meetings or different stages. So those are all kind of listed out there. And as I said, once all the items are checked off, your application website will lock and your application will get submitted to CHFA and DOH. So this is just kind of what it looks like. As you can see, there's a bunch of different things listed there. So some of them are more go to the QAP overview session, and the last one says ready for review, and that's the one that gets used when you're ready to submit your application. So the actual Con app is built into SharePoint. It can be edited and saved directly to the site, so that way multiple people can work on one file, or you can download it onto your individual device, complete it there, and then upload a version back onto the SharePoint site prior to the application submission. If you don't want to do it that way, you can also download the application from the CHFA or DOH websites and then make sure that version that's completed gets uploaded to SharePoint when you're all done. There will be a newer version that's coming out, so just make sure that that's the one that you use with the submission, but there aren't really any major updates between last year's and this year's version. Next slide. So there's also a file upload section, and that is where all the backup items, or as they're listed in the CONAP as attach and label items, can be uploaded to accommodate your application. So you can upload multiple files at once. You can just sort of drag and drop them into the folder, or you can kind of do them one at a time through the Sharepoint site itself. If something gets put in there by mistake, it can be removed and it can be replaced as well. And this is just kind of what it looks like from the Sharepoint applicant perspective. So once you're on the Sharepoint site, you can share it with additional team members, and those team members can either assign or complete tasks, work on the one application, upload files, or use any of the templates that are built into the site as needed. But that initial primary contact member has to be the one to log in and then share the site with the additional team members. There's also help sections built in throughout the entire Sharepoint site. So if you're unsure about something, you can click on those and that'll kind of help walk you through some of the different areas as well. The reference library, like I said, that's kind of got all the templates built into it. You can access that from the left-hand side of your screen in the reference library button. And those are a lot of PDFs, and also there will be a version of the CONAP that you can download. You won't be able to make changes directly to that version, but if for whatever reason you somehow get the template that's built into the main part of the site messed up, or it's not working or something like that, and you don't want to go on the CHFA or DOH websites, you can always download the application directly through this area. So when you're ready to submit the application, we suggest that you try and upload the documents ahead of time that are all the backup items. So that way you're not waiting until the last hour, the last minute, and you get into some kind of connection issue, or there's a big file and it doesn't make it through, and then your application is potentially incomplete. We don't typically look at any items that are on the Sharepoint sites until after the submission date and time. So we won't start reviewing anything, even if you submit it early, until after the cutoff. Nothing that is submitted by email will be accepted as part of the application unless it's specifically requested. And again, to lock your application early, just mark all the task list items as complete. And there, like I said, there's no major changes that are going through the CONAP. There's going to be a couple adjustments or errors that may have been found that are going to get corrected, but there's no major overhauls or significant updates as there have been in previous years.
All right, thank you, Chris. Are there any outstanding questions that answered so far? I think everybody is still here if there are any questions. Lou?
Just a question for Chris in terms of when do you think the corrected or final CONAP would be available embedded in the Sharepoint?
Yeah, so we're working on finalizing a couple things, but after that'll be done, then we should have everything available. I'm guessing within the next week or so, if not less.
Okay, great. Thanks, Chris.
Deb, I have a question about development sponsor equity. This is Peter Wood.
Sure.
If a developer commits equity for matching funds for a program like Community Challenge Grant, can that equity also be used and counted towards development sponsor equity funds?
Well, it can't be counted in both categories of other permanent funding sources and developer fee, or I mean developer sponsor resources. So if there were sufficient grant funds to get the points for the other permanent funding sources, then we could probably consider giving points for the rest of it in the other category.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. All right, here's everybody's contact information. As Terry mentioned, the slide set will be posted on the website. We have recorded the session as well if you'd like to go back and listen to any piece of it. If there aren't any further questions, I'd like to thank all my presenters for assisting us today, and everything was very informative. And I'd like to thank everybody for attending.
Yes, thanks everyone. And don't forget to keep an eye out for frequently asked questions. We'll post those and send e-blasts as well. Enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.